Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second Cutillo Park community meeting. My name is Lauren Bryant, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks for the Cutillo project and about a dozen others throughout the city. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to go over a few how-tos and what to expect. The next slide, please. Interpretation was not requested for this meeting, so this meeting will be in English only. However, for any future meetings, please know that we're eager to have all voices heard and are able to offer translations and interpretation as requested, free of charge for other languages. Please reach out to me for any information about having that. My email address is lauren.bryant@boston.gov, and I will add that into the chat for those of you who would like that for emailing. We also want to make sure that you know that tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be available on the project website within about a week. Please let any of your friends and neighbors who couldn't join us tonight know that they can view the presentation and provide feedback, even if they weren't able to attend the meeting. We also want to make sure that this conversation feels accessible to everybody and that each of you feels comfortable sharing your questions and comments. Please be respectful and mindful of others' time so that everybody has the opportunity to participate. And if you want to, you can always set up a conversation with me and you can contact me through my email. We want to definitely hear your thoughts tonight. That's why we're here. We'll be sharing a short presentation and we'll have open discussion at the end. If a question pops in your head during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat and we can make sure we answer it during the discussion time. And please make sure that we use the chat for comments and questions only related to this project. Hopefully that takes care of all of our housekeeping. And I want to say thank you for John Romano from ONS for being here. And also I know that we have someone from Councilor Edwards' office as well. So I want to thank you both for being here. So now onto the project. First, I want to thank you guys all for your time tonight. I know it's really hard to take time out for community meetings and that everybody is feeling the Zoom fatigue. I personally have 3 evening Zoom meetings this week, so I certainly understand and really appreciate your time. We're going to introduce the team, do a quick project overview, a short review of some meeting 1 content, and then go into our presentation tonight of design concepts. And then, as I said, before we finish, we will have time for discussion at the end of the presentation. So introductions for everybody, for anybody who joined late. My name is Lauren Bryant, and I'm the project manager for Boston Parks for Cutillo Park. I'm also joined by Christine Brandeo, who is our outreach coordinator for Boston Parks. I'm also going to introduce our design team from Stantec. Maybe you both could give a little wave when I say your name and then introduce yourself as you're presenting. We've got Kevin Butel and Adam Fearing with us tonight. So thank you both. Wanted to do a quick reminder on the project that this project and this meeting is a City of Boston meeting about a Boston Park, which is Cutillo Park renovation. We are aware that there is a proposed hotel development adjacent to the park, and we just want to make sure that the community knows that this is not a meeting for that hotel, but is a separate project from that. We kicked off the Cutillo Park project on March 4th with our first community meeting. I was noticing in the participants, there are a lot of familiar names, so I really appreciate everybody joining us again and see some new faces, so welcome. At that first meeting, we discussed the analysis of the park. We talked as a group about how the community uses the park, some concerns about existing conditions, and also people's hopes for the future of the park. At tonight's meeting, the design team is going to share several concepts of how the park can be reimagined to accommodate the desires of the neighborhood, and then to gather your feedbacks on those design concepts. These concepts were created based on the input from the first meeting, and as well as what we heard at the meeting, we received a lot of really great feedback via email from people after the meeting as well. And please know that all of these comments, both from email and from the meeting, are incorporated into the decisions that went into these concepts, even if we don't necessarily read out all of those comments. We also are going to launch a survey after this meeting in order to make sure that people who can't join us at these meetings also have a chance for their thoughts and opinions to be heard as well. And then after tonight, we're going to work to finalize a cohesive design based on your feedback. And then we'll host a third community meeting likely in May to share that design with you. Once we have gotten feedback and make sure that we got it right and that it's a park that you all are comfortable with and happy with, we'll work on construction documentation and then plan to bid the project this summer, possibly starting construction this fall. And the hope is that the park will be reopened summer of 2022. And our estimated cost of construction is the same as we talked about at our last meeting, which is $1,290,000. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for the presentation and stop talking.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm Kevin Butel. I'm a landscape architect with Stantec Planning and Landscape Architecture. I'm here with Adam Fearing from my office, another designer on the team. And we're really excited to talk to you guys about the status of the design, the different concepts that we're looking at, and talking about how we can make this a great park for the North End neighborhood. So like Lauren said, we're going to just briefly review some of the content that we presented at the first meeting about the existing conditions of the park. So you can see here, Cutillo Park is located at the south part of the North End of Boston. It's located between Stillman and Morton Streets, little kind of hidden gem in the North End, or we hope it we can make it even better with these improvements. But if you don't know it's there, it's a little hard to find. I was working just a few blocks away in the North End for several years before I was aware that the park was even there. And as you can see, the park is in close proximity to the Rose Kennedy Greenway. So a little bit about the park's history. So this is an aerial photograph of the park today. But the park was established in 1917, not too long ago, at least by kind of Boston historic standards. And apologize for this being upside down to keep it consistent with the aerial photography. But this was the original layout and design of Cutillo. Some photographs about 6 years after the park opened. And so I think those of you familiar, you'll notice a lot of the same kind of elements in the park and in the adjacent buildings. They have not changed much over the last 100+ years. And this was the design as of 1986, so which is really how the park exists today. So certainly, the City of Boston, the Parks and Recreation Department have made a series of improvements since 1986, but the bones of the park really have not changed since then. So it's been a long time since the park has been reimagined, and that's some of the thinking that we've been doing. And then the aerial today. So a little bit more about the park. So it's a very small park, only about half an acre, 12,300 square feet, or a quarter of an acre rather. And then as far as program space, full-size basketball court, and then there's some small areas with play equipment and swings, and then a central area with less program space, pavement, some foursquare, plantings, benches, trees. And one of the things that we started looking at when we first got involved with the project was looking at other open space parks and recreation facilities in the North End to see how that might impact the design. So this is a diagram showing parks, so not necessarily City of Boston parks, but all open space parks in and around the North End. And we were looking at different playgrounds for different age ranges, the older and younger kids, basketball parks, as well as dog parks in the area. We also got a lot of good feedback from the first meeting, so I'm not going to read through all of this here, but I think, in general, we want to make sure that we're making this park to appeal to as wide a constituency as we can. Successful parks typically have, the most successful parks really appeal to a lot of different types of people. So kids, adults, people with different interests and abilities. And so, we have a limited footprint. There's only so much we're going to be able to do in this relatively small space. But I think the goal is to try and make this park as enjoyable to as many different people in the neighborhood as we possibly can. And of course, safety and security is also going to be one of our top priorities when we're making these improvements as well. Particularly given, like I was saying, so it's kind of it's a little tucked away, a little bit hidden. So that's definitely something that's on our radar and something we've been thinking about. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam here to walk you through some of the higher level thinking that we've been doing that helped inform the different concepts that we've developed and we'll talk to you about here shortly.
Thanks, Kevin. Again, Adam Fearing here, landscape designer at Stantec. Thanks again for having us. So this is an image of the existing conditions. And we were trying to think of how we would create a new framework for this park and how would that inform the layout of all the spaces that are going to, make up the program of this new park. And if you just hit the next slide, what really drove most of the decisions early was the existing trees. They're great canopy coverage, very hard to come by in the city, especially in this area. And it really does create this beautiful pocket park feel, and ideally allowing those to grow and continue to grow and have success. So understanding that we want to save all the trees, given possibly one ginkgo tree, which produces a sort of a strong smelling fruit, and you'll see it in the lower part of the plan highlighted in pink. So that potentially comes out. But then all the other trees stay, and we create these existing tree zones, establish these tree zones that will more or less be either open or improved zones that take the paving off and allow these trees roots to have a whole new sort of root zone and ensure the success of them in the future. And then another sort of big move was understanding that there's the court, and we would like to have court activities, but moving it off of Morton Street to allow that Morton Street to feel a bit more open as one, and potentially open it to a plaza or more passive front door, if you will. And it also just fits well in that rear corner towards Stillman, and it was one of the only positions in the park that wouldn't have affected any of the existing trees. So as we, if you hit the next slide, Kevin, as we began to break up and sort of design the spaces, you'll see it, they all have this general thinking where there's a passive permeable plaza space that invites you in, likely off Morton Street, and there's a court activities zone. But then there's the other areas that, we're calling flex zone 1, 2, 3, but they either work as one or they can be interchanged. It's a kit of parts, and all the pieces that you see in the next, in the concepts can be moved, and it's flexible. So just understanding that this was the main thinking was really saving those trees and letting those create a great canopy for the park. I think if you hit the next slide, it goes right to the first concept.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So this is the first concept that I'll walk you through. So here, as you can see, we're keeping the full court in the new position that Adam was talking about. And one of the ideas here is that we were trying to maximize play opportunities for kids. But like I was saying before, I think what we'd like to do is make sure that this is, kind of fun and playful park for everybody as much as possible. I think some other things that are general approaches that I think we'd like to do for any of these schemes is we want to make this park feel as open and inviting as possible. So we'd like to remove fencing as much as we possibly can. Obviously, fencing is important for various reasons, whether it's ball control for the court or security of the park. So there are going to be certain instances where we need to have it. But I think one of the goals would be to only use as much fencing as we possibly can. So in this scheme here, when we look at the court, so you'll notice we got some kind of funky patterning on the court because we want to make sure.
Just to jump in, we're going to want to use as little fencing as we possibly can.
Right.
Just going to clarify that real quick. You accidentally said as much as we possibly can. I just wanted to clarify.
No, that is not what I intended. Yes, it's a little.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. So with the multi-sport court, so we want to make sure that the court can be used not only for basketball, but for other purposes as well. So that's this area here, of course. And then, so there are lots of things we can do. We can do lots of things with the line work. So we'll stripe it obviously for basketball, but there might be other things we could do. Maybe people want to play, you know, kind of hard court soccer or other games. So we can look at that. We can also look at, you know, introducing foursquare, hopscotch, other kind of pavement games, doing some layout there to encourage that activity, but also to communicate that the court is not just for basketball, it's for everybody to use, to have fun as they see fit. And we could also do patterns that might make it fun if there's some chalk lying around where kids or parents could lie around and you know, be artists in the park as well. So the next component are the play pieces here. So are the play areas where we would imagine, you know, the play equipment, rubber surfacing might go. And these areas are pretty limited in size and footprint, which limits to some extent the kind of play equipment we can put in there. So we still have lots of different options, but we just need to be cognizant of that narrow footprint. So one thing we can do is we can have these play systems go up instead of out, so we can still have lots of good play opportunity. That's probably better for the older kids, of course. And for anything where we're, you know, having those play structures go up high, we're going to be very mindful of the adjacent buildings and windows and those sorts of things to make sure that we don't have any conflicts there. But some of these could be very nice, kind of sculptural pieces that are in the park and pleasing to look at, whether or not you're playing on them. And then with the smaller footprint, you know, it's also nice for play equipment for the smaller kids, so we can look at that. Some of the feedback we got from the first meeting was there seemed to be an indication that play opportunities for older kids was more desirable here, but I think that's something that we'd like to talk about and verify tonight. Another element of this concept is water play. So, you know, we're aware of the greenway that's not far away, and they have substantial water play activities that are nearby. But there still might be a place for some level of water play here for kids to have fun in the summer and cool off close to home, and offer opportunities that are a little different, a different type of experience than what you get at the greenway. So we can look at, you know, different simple ways of having water play elements. So to keep the spaces flexible, which I imagine is going to be a very important thing for this park, to accommodate as many different uses as we can have, you know, a relatively simple ground plane with flush mounted jets. So that way, for those periods of the year where the splash park isn't in use, that area could be used for other purposes. But then we also want to have fun not only with the water coming from the jets, but once it hits the ground, we'd like to have a little bit more fun with it before it enters the drainage system. And, you know, we try to infiltrate as much of that water as possible, maybe use it as a type of irrigation system for some of the trees to maximize the benefits of that water that gets used. And some of the nice parts about that is on the hottest, driest days of the year when the trees might need the water the most, those are the times of year when this kind of water activity would be most desirable. And we could look at other types of water features too. So you can see in the upper left image here, something that, you know, could be used as informal seating for those times of year when it's not being used as a water feature. We could do something more interactive features with runnels and things where kids have the ability to play and redirect the water on the ground plane. But again, you know, that image in the lower left, we'd like to keep this kind of clean and simple and as multifunctional as possible, because, you know, in the Boston area, we'd have a relatively short period of the year when that kind of water feature would be most desirable. Another feature with this, like Adam was saying, that's common to all of our concepts, is the plaza space along Morton Street. So we've been thinking about that in terms of how that can help improve the health of the trees. So we want to use that space for people, but, you know, this image off to the left here with the raised decking, that might give us an opportunity to create sort of different spaces, different zones for seating, but then underneath that decking surface, we could open up and strip away all of the pavement and really improve the growing conditions for those trees to make sure that they're as healthy as they possibly can be and survive as long as possible, because it would not be easy to grow a tree of those size again, certainly not within a short time frame. And then we're also looking at introducing perimeter planting where it makes sense. Now, I think we also want to make sure that we don't want to have any plants that block views. So I think what we'd probably be looking at is ground plane, ground cover type vegetation, something that tends to stay rather low, or preserving the trees. But that kind of middle layer, we probably wouldn't be putting a lot of those sorts of plants in there that might be screening views. And then there are other ways of, thinking about that kind of wood decking and plaza with different patterns that we could do, or how that could be incorporated into different seating areas within the park. We're also thinking about different types of seating. So in an urban park like this, it can be difficult to have movable furniture, but it is possible. The types of chairs we're showing in the upper left, it is possible to anchor those so they can't be removed from the park, but allows them some movement where they can be pulled in and out from tables or different areas and turned around. Other furniture would have to be fixed in place. But then we can also think of furniture not only as a place to sit, but something that's a more playable element. So those squared off logs to the side may not be the most comfortable place to sit for, some of the elderly people in the neighborhood. But this is not an all or nothing thing. I think there's room for different types of seating. And I think trying to get some added value, if we can make these features, whether it's seating or other features within the park, if they can have a playable element, I think that'll make it a more enjoyable park for everyone. So the second concept here also is a full court, but we've made a couple of modifications to this concept. So the first one is we've incorporated a small fitness area. So in here again, we're trying to keep these spaces as multifunctional as possible. So this is a piece of equipment that, to an adult who's looking to exercise, looks like a great place to do that. But to a kid, with the colors and the different features on it, it really kind of blurs that line between a piece of exercise equipment and a piece of play equipment. So that might be something to consider here. Something else that we're looking in this full court option, full court concept, trying to diversify the program in the park, is a small dog area. Now, to be clear, this is not a dog park. This is a very small area. So this would be a place where you could take your dog out. Maybe a small dog would have a little room to run around, socialize with some other dogs, get a drink of water, place to go to the bathroom, kind of a designated place in the park for those sorts of things to happen. And then we could have, potentially there are other things we could do. So maybe people would like a place where they could wash their dog outside. We could explore those sorts of opportunities too, if that's something that's of interest. This third concept, so this is the first one where we're looking at the half court to try and see what kind of possibilities that opens up at Cutillo. And I think one of the nice things is it removes a lot of the fencing. So we can get rid of a lot of the fencing that would go around that basketball court. So that opens up the court to a lot more of the park. And I think really starts to blur the lines between the play area that we're showing here and the court. So when it's not being used for basketball, it could all feel like it's part of the same play space. We've also introduced a flexible lawn space here. And so the idea would be, given the high amount of traffic that we imagine this would get, that we'd probably be looking at a synthetic turf surface, something that could hold up to a lot of wear and traffic, but that could be used for lots of different things, picnicking or other activities. And then you can also see there we have a small dog area up in the corner here. So one of the things we were looking at, if we wanted to have a dog area in the park, I think this area in the upper right or what I was showing earlier in the lower right seem to be logical places for that to go, where it's somewhat separated from the rest of the park. We certainly wouldn't be looking to have an area like that more centrally located within the park. And then you can see here also a little bit more space for a fitness structure. And then we also have a small nature play area that we're showing in this concept. So that would really be expanding on these play areas using natural materials. So we could look at bringing in boulders, stone, or wood as different play elements, whether it's something that we intend the kids to actually climb on, or it's more of a kind of a sculptural piece. Those are all things that we could look at. And then the last thing I'll talk about with this concept are the play opportunities. So I think one of the nice things about having a little bit more room is now the footprint of the play equipment can be a little bit larger, which means we have more options we can consider with the play. And I think it would also make it, particularly when it's, you know, for the older kids, we don't need to worry quite so much about the proximity to the street. Of course, Morton Street is not like your typical Boston street. It's a very quiet street. So we could do some control with benches or other means rather than fencing this off. So that might be one strategy, to have not only a bigger play area, but also a way to minimize fencing around at least some of the play areas. And then in this concept, we do show a play area for younger kids. That's a spot where it might make sense to have a low fence to help contain kids. So if we can go with some bigger structures, like I was saying, it just gives us some more possibilities. So other ones where we could go up, but it gives us lots of different options. So we could incorporate lots of features, slides, and other things that could be incorporated into the design if we have more space to play with. And this is the fourth concept we'll show tonight, fourth and final concept, another half court, half basketball court scheme. And this one here, a couple of changes where we've got a synthetic turf lawn, but it's really a much larger space than we had before. And that can open it up to even more potential. So I know, you know, in COVID, it's been popular to have outdoor exercise. And I imagine that kind of activity, you know, will continue once we're past the pandemic. And so that's something that we could look at including in the park as well. So I think that concludes the brief summary of the different concepts we were looking at. I think we'd like to open it up for questions and discussion, but I think before we do that, if you'd indulge us, we'd like to mine you for a little bit more information. So Lauren, jump in here if I'm
Sure.
not fully
Do you want me to jump in? And
Sure, yeah, go
okay.
for it.
So what we were hoping for is, instead of doing a poll where we just ask yes or no questions, what we're hoping is to talk through a couple of options, which, as you can see, are labeled with letters. And we're hoping that you guys would be able to put into the chat which things you prefer. And this allows people who may not be comfortable speaking during the meeting to also give their feedback. But what our thoughts are is it also gives you the opportunity, instead of just saying, I like A or I like B, you can say, I like A because of X reason, or I like B, but I don't like this. So we're hoping that as Kevin goes through and kind of explains the difference between the two options that we're looking at, that you would be willing to just throw some comments and some letters into the chat so that we can follow along and keep those comments.
So the first question we have for you is, what is your preference for the court? Do you prefer the full court or the half court? Not only for the court itself, but also for, you know, potentially just having a little bit of extra space for other park programming, if you went with a half court option. So I'll give everybody a little bit of time to make some comments, and then I'll move on to the next question. So the next question we have are for the play spaces. Do you have a preference?
Kevin, can I just jump in really quickly?
Sure. Yep.
For those who are commenting, feel free to continue commenting, even if we move to the next choice of options. And we have changed the letters. So even if you want to still comment A or B, it won't get confusing as we move through. So please, for those of you who are still commenting on half versus full court, please continue as we're going through to add comments on all of these.
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. So do you have preferences for larger play spaces? Like I was saying, that opens up some more possibilities for different equipment we could look at, or do you think that the small play spaces are adequate for Cutillo? So C, if you think the smaller play spaces will work well, and D, if your preference is for larger play. And I think larger play would probably be easier to accommodate, the older kid play opportunities, whereas the smaller spaces, I think we could do a very good job, addressing the play needs of the smaller kids. Okay. Move on to the next one. For the plaza area, do you have a preference for more of an open, flexible layout, or which is E, or F, where it's filled with more seating? So I think one of the advantages to the E, the more open one, is that you get more flexible use. It could be used for potentially lots of different purposes. But I think some of those would need to be programmed potentially. And so when there wasn't that sort of programming happening in the park, sometimes these sorts of spaces just don't get used quite as much. Whereas the seating area, you don't necessarily have the same kind of flexibility as the more open layout, but it might tend to attract more people on a more regular basis to the park. All right, so move on to the next one. As far as types of seating, I'm curious to know if people would prefer bench seating, tables and chairs, or more of the platform seating, kind of like what we were showing with some of these wood decking options that we've been exploring. So G for the bench, I for the tables and chairs, and H for the platform seating. And then we've shown you a bunch of different other park elements that we could incorporate that aren't necessarily in every single one of the concepts we were showing, but could be incorporated into any one of them if desired. So we've got the exercise equipment that could also do dual purpose, having some play value. We've got a flexible lawn space. We've got water play. And we also have the dog area. So I think it would be helpful if you could use those letters we have coded here, and if you put them in order of importance, most important to least important. And if you're not interested in it all, feel free to just leave it off. But I think that would help us gauge what the interest is for these different programmatic elements. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and open it up to your comments and questions.
Kevin, should we stop sharing potentially so that everyone can see each other? And then if we want to pull something up specifically to look at, we can?
Yep, can do that.
Does anybody want to go first and share any thoughts on what you saw tonight? David, if you're talking, you're muted.
Hi, this is Dave Kubiak. Well, first of all, you started this by saying how small the park is, and then you threw so much stuff at it. I think it needs to be enjoyed by all. So I hope there are elements of the park that can be enjoyed by all, including both active and passive elements. At the same time, you want some open space, not too much stuff in this park. I guess one of my concerns is Morton Street. You kind of hinted that Morton Street is the primary entrance to the park, or should be the primary entrance to the park. And I don't disagree, but that means Morton Street has to be transformed. It can remain accessible to vehicles. It can be designed to support vehicles, especially emergency vehicles and maybe park maintenance vehicles, but it should no longer be a road. I think it should be an entrance to the park, and there should be park features that extend into Morton Street and over to Salem Street. That way you're inviting people to enter the park. There's no other way to invite people to enter this park except at the intersection of Morton and Salem Streets. And I think that's what should be done there. I'm also concerned that I'm seeing interfaces between this park and the proposed hotel in your presentation. And I'm wondering why that is, or if that is. I saw the so-called crosswalk across Morton Street that seems to be aligned possibly with the passageway that's been proposed through what I call the tunnel, through the hotel. And I don't think that we should be assuming any hotel at that site in the design of this park. I'm also, and at the same time, on one hand, I hope the hotel doesn't happen. On the other hand, maybe I'm concerned that some of these park elements are going to be affected by the hotel, like passive seating areas, for instance. And I don't know how to deal with that. I just prefer that the hotel never happen. Dog area, one of the problems with that is the size. The park just isn't big enough for that, but also it's the noise. As much as I love the dog parks up in the flights over the Gassy, they're wonderfully designed. They're terrific for dog owners. I'm glad they have it. It has pushed the illicit activity out of the flights for good. That's wonderful, but it generates a lot of noise, and I would not want to live across the street from that dog park on Snow Hill Street, and I don't think the noise impact of dogs should be put on to all of the people that currently live around Cutillo Park. That's it for now.
So Dave, I'm going to try to address that. There was a lot of things there, so I'm going to try to address those really quickly. You're absolutely right that there's a lot of stuff that we have talked about in a small park, and that's part of why we wanted to talk about it tonight, is because if everybody wants a little bit of everything, we've shown that we can do that. If there are things that are preferential, we can focus on those too. And so that's why we wanted to really hear from everybody and show a lot of different ideas about what could be there, so that we could really get a feel for what the community wants to see. So you're absolutely right, but there was a reason for that. In terms of Morton Street, I 100% get where you're coming from with that. And it's something that I brought up with Boston Transportation Department, because clearly Boston Parks does not own that road, and it's not a decision that we can make. I have brought that up to them to let them know that it came up at our first community meeting, and I'll let them know it came up again today, so that if it's something that they're interested in, it's something parks could absolutely program as part of the park, but it's not something that we can lead or that we can make a decision on. But I can always, at our next community meeting that we have, hopefully I'll have some information back from BTD on that. In terms of the hotel, it is, like I said earlier, a separate project. It's not a city project. It's not associated with our project. But at the same time, we also have to be realistic that if a hotel happens, we want to make sure we're thinking about how that would affect the park. So like you said, in terms of seating or other things, if there is a hotel that is built there, it does affect the park, and we can't go into it assuming that it doesn't. And so we're not advocating for it. We're not as the Parks Department coordinating with that. But the decision to shift the basketball court, I think you were talking about that edge along Morton, was not about the hotel. It was really about looking at the space and those edges and how Morton Street, because it's a narrower street, feels even more constricted. And when you double that constriction of the width of the road with the combination of the basketball fencing being higher, it feels so much more enclosed than on the opposite side of the park. And that was really a lot of the reason for that shift, was because of the size of Morton Street. So I just wanted to address those. And I think the dog area, it's one of the things that we're talking about tonight and wanting to get people's opinion, because it did come up. So it's good, both with yours and some of the other comments that have come up in the chat, to be able to get some good feedback on that. So hopefully that answered some of your questions. Is there anybody else that wanted to jump in too? Hi, Kristen.
Hi. I'm Kirsten Hoffman, president
Sorry,
of Friends
Kirsten.
of Cutillo Park. That's okay. I thought that was a great presentation, and I appreciate the creative use of interaction there. I think that's something that our Zoom meetings have really lacked, is real interaction like you would have in a normal community meeting. So I thought that was great. That a lot of the ideas were great. I echo Dave's comments about Morton Street. I think probably one of the biggest problems with Cutillo Park is Morton Street, and in particular the trash condition on Morton Street. And I know BPD is BPD, but we have elected officials. We have a new mayor. We're going to have a new mayor in the fall. So we can help advocate for that. But I would really encourage everybody to point out to our elected officials and advocate with BTD and the mayor's office that part of Morton Street really has no use except as part of Cutillo Park. And that, and everybody knows the trash condition, and I think that's paramount. That has to be paramount in these plans. I think I thought a lot of the ideas were great. We submitted a letter with some specific ideas, and it's great to see this project moving forward with so much consideration being given to use areas. The one thing I worry about a little bit is ongoing maintenance. So that's an issue with all of the city's parks. So when a water feature is added, or a dog station is added, or green space, or whatever, I think it's very important to have a maintenance plan for that going forward. And I think one thing I didn't hear about was lighting as part of the plan. So I think that should be part of the plan that's presented at the next meeting, taking into account, in particular, the residential nature of that area. But I thought it was a great presentation.
Thank you. And could I ask one quick follow-up? So what are your thoughts on the lighting that's out there now? Is it purely from a lighting standpoint, is it adequate in your mind? Or
my thought, depressing. Robert, you live right there, in Mary Beth. What do you guys think?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Rob Sawtell. I live, my family and I live in a unit basically right above the current seesaw. So I see a lot of Cutillo Park. The lighting now, I think from just how light it is sufficient from my perspective, but definitely dated and depressing is probably a good way to describe it.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there might be one corner that's pretty dark by the swing sets. From one of my windows, I could kind of see a lot of people going back there. So I think there's corners, and people are always going to look for dark corners to go and, do things that they shouldn't do. I will speak, on behalf. I agree. So, with a lot of the comments so far. I know the dog park question is a tough one, but I think as someone pointed out, I think it is good to just acknowledge that people will be going by with their dogs. It tends to be just a nice close place for me to go, and I've met some nice neighbors there and had some nice conversations even late at night when the lights are on. So I don't think it necessarily would end up being like a destination like the Rough Dog Park is, but I think it's just another reason that prior to having a dog, I rarely walked through the park. So I think it just gives me a reason to go and enjoy the trees and the sunshine and just to get out of the building for a little bit. I also wanted to point out, I made a note, I really loved the nature play idea that you had. I think that's something that as city dwellers, we are always looking for nature, and ideally to see kids, climbing on some larger gross motor playscapes would be really nice, and not necessarily like the big mammoth jungle gyms, which I don't tend to particularly love, but I like the idea of maybe having large open-ended gross motor play. And certainly keeping the theme of nature would be, I think, ideal, again, just from a perspective of living in the city. So seeing wood, being able to appreciate the trees, flower beds are always great. But a lot of great options you've given us.
Thank you. And Greg, I know, Gregory, you've had your hand up. There you are.
Yep, thank you. So I, like others, I want to remark that I think many of the elements are excellent and really exciting. I particularly appreciate the attention that was paid to the trees. I'm not sure how I feel about the ginkgo coming down, but in general, I really like the tree cover that we have in that park because it's so rare in the North End. In a couple of other comments, I am a little bit apprehensive about especially movable seating, but even picnic seating in terms of the maintenance of the park and the use of the park. Recognizing how many people I see in the neighborhood carrying, we want people to be able to carry their pizza out of Ernesto's and, have a lunch. But, with all of the resources that the Greenway has to remove trash and maintain their space, I would rather drive that kind of traffic towards the Greenway and not towards Morton Street and Stillman Street, because I don't know that it will be like some other parks that I encounter here in the city, and the trash will be overflowing with folks from visitors coming to town, who are welcome, but we would have to deal with the trash. And then the seating areas, in addition to attracting potential trash issues, I also, I'm not oblivious to the fact that, we will always have people that are experiencing homelessness amongst us. And I wrestle with what kinds of spaces we should provide to folks and what we shouldn't do. Both from the community's point of view and also recognizing their dignity and their ability to live in the city too. So I guess what I'm leaning at is I think picnic tables are probably a very bad idea in that space, and things that could turn into tent encampments are probably going to do so. And then finally, the surface, there's a mural on one side, and I think Kirsten had surfaced many of those photographs for the Friends of Cutillo Park some time ago. But if possible, I like the idea of exposing that brick and making it look more like the Prado or the Paul Revere Plaza, because that's what it really echoes to me in another part of the North End. And that would stitch it in with the rest of the neighborhood and restore it to its historic appearance. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other thoughts they want to join in?
Rob has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I did not see that. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to give a little more of a thorough bit of feedback. I agree with others that the presentation was impressive, and I liked most of what you have done. So thank you for that. Just a couple of points. Playground wise, play equipment wise, I also like the idea of sort of a natural, maybe, green included approach. As someone who has a 2.5-year-old daughter, I have visited every playground in a wide radius, and there's not a lot of that in the neighborhood. It's a lot of, the bright blue and sort of typical playgrounds that you might see. Also agree with what Gregory said in terms of potential shelters. The current playground, basically the place where it could be used as a temporary home, it is often used that way by the homeless population. So something to maybe consider in terms of structures that you implement. And I think the biggest issue that I see with the current park, that I think a lot of people have said, I just want to echo, is how hidden it is. And I don't know how easy it is to design wise fix that. But I see the biggest problem with the park and why it hasn't been used well for a long time is that there are so many places to hide and do unsavory things that turn away people like myself and, my daughter. In Morton Street, I think, is the biggest issue with that. So if there's any way to make it more welcoming and less, dark, seedy corners, I think that would be huge. Also, I joined late, so I don't know if this was covered or if it's something for a later meeting, but as someone who lives directly above the park, I don't know if construction timeline has been discussed, noise level of the construction, what time in the morning it will start, things like that.
So we did not talk about all of that, but in terms of construction timeline, what we're looking at is hoping to bid the project this summer with a fall construction start, and then hoping that the project is complete by summer of next year. In terms of construction level of noise, unfortunately, it can be noisy. In terms of typical park projects, the noisiest time tends to be the demolition. When it starts to go together, it's not quite as loud. So it's not a consistent noise level typically throughout an entire project. And in terms of the hours, our standard hours are between, I believe it's 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. But we have in some areas put specific timeframes based on neighborhoods. But that's our standard, is I believe 8 to 4.
Great, thanks.
Was that all of it? Sorry, did I get all those questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you anticipate a delay because of, I hear a lot of equipment is delayed these days. I believe there's the Clarendon Street Playground may be delayed in their recent makeover because of delay of equipment. So any thoughts there? Because I know it could just be frustrating if work starts and then it's, a delay for a couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the last thing any of us want, is to take a playground or a park offline and have it sit. That's the worst thing we can do. So one of the things I have seen just occasional, and I don't know specifically on Clarendon, that one's not mine, but I don't know specifically on what the delay was caused for there. The projects that I've been working on, all of the delays with fabrication were because some of the manufacturers, the plants were shut down, which is understandable for COVID. But all the projects that I've worked on in the last probably 6 months have caught up in terms of back on track, not necessarily back on the same schedule, but they're now back on track and they're not getting further delays. That doesn't mean, I think right now COVID is unknown for everything. That doesn't mean, manufacturers aren't going to shut back down. But one of the things that I've been trying to do a lot recently, even before COVID, is wanting to make sure that the contractors order the equipment and they have a ship date. They know when it's going to be there before they start demolition. Some contractors like to demo early because then they can start getting paid while they're getting other equipment ordered. And it's one of the things that we really don't want to have happen on any of our parks. And I think especially with Cutillo, it is such a small park and it's so tight to get in there. I cannot even imagine a contractor wanting to mobilize more than once. So hopefully that will also help us, that people are going to want to be able to get in, do the work and get out, because it's not an easy site. It's not the site that contractors want to camp at because it's kind of an easy one. I don't know if that helps at all.
That makes sense.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Will the design include security cameras?
Security cameras are not typical in Boston parks. If it's something that the community requests, we're happy to talk to the police about it, but it hadn't come up yet.
We've actually already spoken with the police about it.
What did they say, Kirsten?
Sorry?
What did they say?
Oh, we should be on the list, but I
Okay.
know they were extremely backlogged and it was pre-COVID and I haven't managed to follow up with them post-COVID, but we did speak with them and they did have a consultant come out and look at some
great.
locations for cameras. Now
Okay.
with our actual renovated park, those locations are probably going to change, but we can maybe once the park plans are done, then we can follow up with BPD again and pick locations, because I think cameras
Yeah,
would be useful there.
I can reach out to them too, because what typically happens is if the police are in support of it, what happens is, like you said, they sort of, each district gets a certain number of cameras and they've got this list of how they're installing them places.
Yeah.
But my experience has been, if they're in favor of a park getting cameras, if Parks puts it in our budget and pays to have them installed, they are happy for that. And then they take over the care and the monitoring of them if we can pay for it during our project. So if the police are on board with it, I can work with them with the plans as they come together to figure out those locations.
Yeah, we were working with Stephen Moy.
Okay, I don't know him, but I'll check in with my contact too.
He was our north end. I don't remember what the exact name was, but our north end liaison.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
And I do have kind of a construction related question as well.
Okay.
So there used to be a hockey rink, I think kind of where the basketball court was. But when do you guys get into the process of actually figuring out what's under that basketball court? Because when you look at the side of the basketball court that butts up against the wall where the beautiful mural is, you can kind of see where the benches used to be that are in the old court. It looks like they're below the surface of the court. But then, so when do you get into the point where you're actually doing some investigation in there to figure out what the actual ground level was?
Kevin, I don't know if you want to jump in with what you guys already have with some past drawings and test bits that we do, but we do know that used to be flooded, and there's also some of the there's some of the water supply that's still there. You can actually see from where they used to flood it, some of the grates and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think we haven't gotten to the level where we've been looking at the grading plan and how we might be kind of raising or lowering different areas of the park, but certainly there is some concerns in any place in Boston. When you start, excavating or lowering things, you're just never 100% sure of what you're going to encounter. So I was actually not aware that there were benches along that area. So appreciate that.
It looks like there are. If you go down Morton Street, kind of look at where Morton Street butts up against the building. Now, if whoever is actually doing the project, if they find those historic benches, this is all a little ways down the road, but that would be great to somehow incorporate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think anything we could do to kind of reveal that, preserve it, or, if necessary, repurpose any of those historic artifacts, that's something that we'd be very interested in doing for sure.
It didn't even occur to me that those historic benches might still be there. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. there any other thoughts that people want to share? Well, so for everybody, like I said, for those of you who may have joined a little bit late, our next step is to take the feedback that we've gotten